Được chưa?
To stream của chị nào.
To cái gì?
Đây. Mày gửi cái resort làm gì Châu?
Cái đấy là những cái cần tải các thứ này. Lại những cái link mà dùng ở trong ấy, dùng ở trong khóa học ấy. Thì đến chỗ nào mà người ta bảo bấm link nào thì mình vào link đấy. Mình bật đấy đi, mình bật nó sẽ passion đi.
Thằng Đức bật đi.
Mic mày mà.
Hả?
Bật sự tiến ồn đi.
À. Bật kiểu gì?
Đợi đi từ từ. Trên Messenger ấy. Cái nút gạch cạnh cái nút disconnect ấy.
Tao không có nút nữa.
Phải, không có luôn.
Ừ.
Thế thôi. Cần bút đâu. Cứ để push to talk đi. Được chưa, để bắt đầu nào. Ừ. Đây là cái tổng hợp những gì mình sẽ học được trong cái khóa này. Thì đầu tiên là web dev thì frontend là HTML CSS, còn backend là JavaScript. Với lại học cả Git với GitHub với lại version control nữa. Đây, HTML thì là dùng bản 5, CSS dùng bản 3. Bootstrap là gì? Bootstrap là cái kiểu template đấy. Biết template không? Tức là mẫu ấy, mày lên mạng mày kiếm PowerPoint mẫu về đúng không? Thì Bootstrap là frontend mẫu, được chưa? Lên mạng kiếm HTML, CSS người ta làm sẵn về để làm thì gọi là Bootstrap. Được chưa? JavaScript thì là bản ES6. Giờ ra đến bản ES8 rồi nhưng mà khóa này dùng bản ES6. Còn cái document object model tức là cái model của app, cái mà cách nó vận hành ấy. jQuery, mấy cái này thì 6 mới học chúa. Đấy, đây hai cái này là backend này. Thực ra nếu mà nói về dùng cái gì để code ấy thì không phải là dùng ngôn ngữ mà là dùng framework. Tức là cứ hiểu như là ngôn ngữ nó là ngôn ngữ, còn framework là cái mà người ta dùng ngôn ngữ để viết ra, để dùng cái framework đấy để làm một cái gì đó. Ví dụ như là C# đúng không? Thì là ngôn ngữ đúng không? Mà ASP.NET là cái framework dùng C# để làm web. Còn những cái khác thì là cái framework khác để dùng làm app điện thoại chẳng hạn các thứ. Thì học là học framework chứ không phải học ngôn ngữ. Đây, Node.js là framework dùng để làm backend web. Database thì dùng SQL, MongoDB. Chứ mấy cái này học mới biết được. Mình cứ học đi.
Hi guys.
Muốn để full hay là để kiểu này? Ai mất mạng? Cứ bật mic lên mà nói. Cái này là how does the internet work rồi.
Guys, it's Angela from the App Brewery.
để một ngày làm. Xin lỗi.
And in this lesson, we're going to deep dive into how exactly does the internet actually work? Because here's this thing that we use
Có nghe được tiếng không? Okay.
every single day, and we completely take it for granted. So before we start developing awesome websites and
Học mà muốn tạm dừng thì cứ nói nha.
Ê, tao vừa bị mất
Web
mạng,
apps.
nói lại cái.
Cái gì?
Tao vừa bị mất mạng.
Thì bắt đầu học rồi đấy. Học thì để full màn hình như thế này này, xong rồi sub thì bằng tiếng Anh, được chưa? Mà lúc nào mà cần tạm dừng thì cứ nói.
for people to access through the internet, it's really important that we understand the fundamentals of how the internet actually works. So, what exactly is the internet? Well, a lot of people think of it as a cloud, something that's hanging around in the sky. It's super complex, super difficult to understand. But actually, that's not it at all. The internet is really simple. All it is just a long piece of wire. And the wire connects different computers to each other. So you might have one computer that's in Seattle and another computer that's in London, and they can talk to each other and transfer data through this giant wire. Now, some of these computers attached to the internet have a very special job. They have to be online 24/7, ready to serve you all of the data and the files that you are requesting when you try to access websites. And the computers that are doing that job we would call a server. And the computers that any user would use to access the internet is called a client. Now, you can imagine a web server as a giant library that's open 24/7. And you can go in there at any hour of the day and request, I want to see Google's homepage, or I want to see the latest post on TechCrunch. And it would be able to serve you with all of the files and data that you would need to be able to view whatever website it is that you requested. Now, you can imagine if there's a library that's big enough to house all of these websites, then it's going to be pretty difficult to quickly locate the thing that you want out of this giant library, right? So how is this problem solved on the internet? Well, let's say that you're sitting at home on your computer and you type in google.com because you want to head over to the main Google homepage. What happens behind the scenes is that your browser will send a message to your internet service provider. So these are the people who you pay to be able to access the internet. And if you're in the US, that's a company like AT&T or Comcast. And if you're in the UK, then that would be something like BT or TalkTalk. Now, the message that you're sending the ISP is, I want to see google.com. And the ISP will then relay that message to something called a DNS server, a domain name system server. And a DNS server is essentially just a souped up phone book. And what happens when you make that request through your browser is the DNS server will look up in its database as to what is the exact IP address of that website that you're trying to access. And every single computer that's connected to the internet has an IP address. This is like a postal address for your computer, so that when people need to send and receive files on the internet, each computer can be located by their unique IP address. And once the DNS server finds the IP address, it sends that back to your browser. So now you know the exact address where you can find the Google homepage. The next thing that happens is you will send a direct request to that address through your internet service provider. And this message will be delivered via what's called the internet backbone. Now, the internet backbone isn't some sort of analogy for some clever programming. It's literally the backbone of the internet. And if you head over to submarinecablemap.com, you can view all of the underwater cables that power the internet. And the internet is made up of these huge, sprawling masses of wires connecting all of the world's internet users. As you can imagine, it's a pretty complex world out there. Now, if I'm sitting in London and I want to see a website that's hosted in the United States, then my browser would have to make a request that goes through one of these cables under the Atlantic Ocean in order to reach the United States. And once that computer has received my request, they'll send back all of the relevant data again through these giant cables. And to navigate all of this crazy underwater and above water wires, all I have is an IP address. It's like as if I'm sending a letter halfway across the world, and my only hope for my letter to reach my friend is that postal address on the front of the envelope. So once I've gotten the IP address of the website that I want to access, then my browser sends another message through the internet service provider via the internet backbone to the server that is located at that address, 216.582.10.46. And the computer that's located at that address is, of course, the Google server. And on this server, there's all of the files that I would need in order to be able to view the Google homepage. The server then sends all of those files back to me through the internet backbone, and I get to see the Google homepage in my browser. And all of that happens in a matter of milliseconds. And just to imagine the journey that my data has gone on, traveling through the world thousands of times per day. So why don't you give it a go? Open up your browser and type in 216.58.210.46 and hit enter to see the Google homepage being served up to you through the internet.
Kịp không? Theo được không? Alo.
Được,
Minh.
được.
Ok.
Mình đang quay đúng không Đức?
Now that we
Đức à? Đức. Không.
We've spoken about how the internet works, in this episode, I want to talk about how exactly do websites work? What exactly does HTML, CSS, and JavaScript do exactly? Now, in order to access a web page, we all know that you need a browser, right? And that can be Chrome, Safari, Firefox, whatever is your favorite one. These are all pieces of software that allow you to look up the IP address of your website and be able to receive data that it can render into these beautiful websites that we see. Now, the data that you receive from the server usually consists of 3 types of files: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And it's very likely that you would have come across these types of files or these words before, because they're so common and they're so integral to how websites work. But what exactly do they do, and why are there so many different types of files? Why can't we just have one file that's, a website? Well, they actually have very different jobs. The HTML code file is responsible for the structure of your website. So if a website was a house, then the HTML would be the builder who would come in to build the walls or put in a toilet. Basically, they establish the structure of your house. And when you write HTML code, you also build up the structure of your website. So you could use HTML to add an image or a button or a text box, whatever it is that you need in your website. Now, the second type of file are CSS files. And these files are responsible for styling your website. If you were building a house, then this would be the painters and decorators. They would be going around painting the walls or adding stylistic flourishes to your place, and generally making the place look the way that you want it to. And that's exactly what CSS code does as well. When you incorporate CSS, it allows you to specify how you want your website to look. So you could say that, yes, I have a button that I got from my HTML, but that button, I want it to be red, and I want the text to be white, and I want the font of the text to be in Arial. That is all done using CSS code. Now, the final component is the JavaScript code. And this is the code that allows your website to actually do things or have behavior. And if you were building a house, you would have the electrician come in who would be able to connect the wires so that your light bulbs actually switch on. Or somebody who comes in and does the plumbing so that your toilet can actually flush. And the JavaScript code does exactly that. It allows your website to actually do things and have behavior. So if we take the Google web.
Thôi,